you've seen this before. The person who did everything right. Good grades, careful choices, solid logic. The one everyone trusts when money comes up. They can explain inflation like it's a casual story and break down investing without breaking a sweat. And yet, somehow, their bank account didn't get the memo. Meanwhile, someone who couldn't care less about perfect timing or elegant theories is quietly building wealth. No complex strategy, no intellectual performance, just results. It feels slightly insulting. Like the system forgot to reward effort and decided to favor momentum instead. Because if intelligence is supposed to lead to better decisions, and better decisions are supposed to lead to better outcomes, then what exactly happened here? You've probably been that person at some point. Careful with decisions, almost to a fault. You don't just spend, you evaluate. You don't just act, you think it through first. Twice, if needed. You understand how money works. You know saving matters. You've read the articles, watched the breakdowns, maybe even sat through a course or two that promised to simplify everything, and somehow made it slightly more complicated. You know the difference between assets and liabilities. You know long-term investing wins. None of this is new to you. And still, things feel slower than they should. You hesitate, not because you're lost, but because you're trying to get it right. You compare options, weigh risks, double-check decisions that were already reasonable the first time. You avoid obvious mistakes, which sounds great in theory. In practice, it creates a strange side effect. On paper, everything looks solid, responsible, controlled, like someone who should be ahead. But real life doesn't quite match that image. Progress drags, opportunities pass without making noise, and the frustrating part is this: nothing looks wrong. There's no big failure to point at. No obvious bad decision. Just a quiet sense that despite doing what seems correct, the results are underwhelming. We're told from the beginning that intelligence is an advantage, that smarter people make better decisions. And better decisions, naturally, should lead to better financial outcomes. Clean logic. Very convincing, slightly misleading. Because reality doesn't follow that script as often as we'd like. You'll find plenty of intelligent people stuck in the same place for years. Not for lack of knowledge, but something else. Something less obvious. They rely on understanding as if it were progress. As if knowing what to do quietly counts as doing it. It doesn't. There's this expectation that clarity should come first. That you should feel certain before you move. That once everything makes sense, action becomes easy, and results follow naturally. In practice, that moment rarely shows up. Meanwhile, money seems to respond to a completely different rulebook. One that doesn't reward perfect thinking nearly as much as it rewards imperfect action. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. The same ability that makes someone smart often slows them down. They see more angles, more risks, more reasons to wait just a little longer. Overthinking starts to replace doing. Planning quietly takes the place of execution. Nothing looks wrong from the outside. In fact, it looks responsible. But under the surface, something is off. Because while everything feels under control, nothing is really moving. The uncomfortable truth is simpler than it looks. Intelligence is not a financial advantage by default. It's just a tool. And tools don't do much on their own. In fact, used the wrong way, intelligence can create a very convincing illusion. The illusion that understanding something means you're in control of it. You know how the system works, so it feels like you're already playing the game. You're not. You're observing it. Understanding is passive. It feels productive, but it doesn't create exposure. And without exposure, nothing compounds. Not money, not experience, not confidence. Wealth doesn't come from having the cleanest logic or the most complete picture. It comes from interacting with reality repeatedly, even when the picture is incomplete. And that's where things start to split. Smart people often optimize for being right. They want the decision to make sense from every angle. They want alignment, clarity, a kind of internal approval before they move. But money doesn't reward that. It doesn't pause and say, now that you fully understand, you may proceed. It responds to positioning, to timing, to consistency. Sometimes the person with less analysis ends up with more movement. Not because ignorance is superior, but because action creates feedback, and feedback creates adjustment. Meanwhile, hesitation resets everything. You go back to zero, just with better explanations, and the system quietly and without judgment keeps rewarding the ones who show up and participate. There are a few patterns behind this, quiet ones, easy to miss, especially if you're used to thinking more than acting. The first is analysis paralysis. When you're intelligent, you naturally see more variables, more ihtimalat, more risks, more outcomes stacked on top of each other. It feels like an advantage, and in some contexts it is. But here's the catch. The more you see, the harder it becomes to choose. Every option comes with a trade-off you fully understand. Every decision has a downside you can clearly explain. So instead of moving, you keep optimizing, adjusting, refining something that was already good enough. And while that's happening, time keeps moving in one direction. In finance, time is not neutral. It doesn't wait for you to feel ready. It either compounds in your favor or quietly works against you while you're still thinking about it. The second pattern is emotional detachment from action. When everything becomes logic-driven, decisions start to feel theoretical, like you're solving a problem on paper instead of making a move in real life. You analyze scenarios, compare outcomes, simulate possibilities in your head. It all feels productive, and to some extent it is. But there's a missing piece. Execution has weight. It has friction. It requires you to commit, not just conclude. And when you're too comfortable in the world of ideas, that step feels heavier than it should. So you delay it. Not consciously, just naturally. Because thinking is clean, acting is messy. The third pattern is the fear of being wrong. This one hides well, especially behind competence. If you're used to being right, making a mistake doesn't feel like a small event. It feels like a disruption. Something to avoid, not something to use. So you wait. You look for confirmation, for stronger signals, for a level of certainty that makes the decision feel safe. But here's the problem. In markets, in business, in most financial decisions, that safety usually shows up after the opportunity is gone, not before. So you end up protecting yourself from small mistakes by missing larger gains. Individually, these patterns don't seem dangerous. They actually look responsible, thoughtful, even disciplined. But together, they create a loop. You think more, so you act less. Because you act less, you miss timing. Missing timing reinforces hesitation, and that hesitation pushes you to think even more next time. It's a clean, logical cycle, and completely unproductive. Meanwhile, someone with less information steps in earlier, makes a move that isn't perfect, gets feedback, adjusts, moves again. They're not smarter. They're just in motion. And motion, over time, beats hesitation with impressive consistency. Imagine two people looking at the exact same opportunity. The first one does everything right. They research for weeks, read reports, compare scenarios, watch analyses from every possible angle. They want to understand the full picture before committing. It's careful, methodical, and honestly, a bit exhausting just to watch. By the time they finally feel ready, the opportunity has already moved. Not disappeared completely, just shifted enough to make it less attractive, so they hesitate again, because now it's not as good as before, and the cycle resets. The second person approaches the same situation differently. They don't ignore risk, but they don't wait for perfect clarity either. They start small, an amount they can tolerate being wrong with. They get in early, not because they're certain, but because they're willing to learn in motion. They make mistakes. Of course they do. But each mistake gives them something the first person never gets. Real feedback. Not theory, not prediction, not simulation. Actual interaction with reality. And that changes everything. Now shift this to careers. One person waits for the ideal role. The perfect alignment of skills, timing, compensation, and growth. They want a clear path before making a move. Something that makes sense long-term. The other takes opportunities that are simply good enough. Not perfect, not permanent, but useful. They gain experience, build connections, increase their value step by step. Years pass. The second person compounds skills, relationships, and income. The first one has a cleaner plan that never fully left the planning phase. Even in basic financial habits, this shows up. Someone understands budgeting in detail, categories, percentages, optimization strategies. They set everything up perfectly for a while. Then life happens, consistency breaks, and the system quietly falls apart. Another person keeps it simple. They save a fixed portion, invest regularly, and don't overcomplicate the process. It's not elegant, but it's consistent. And consistency, over time, does what complexity often fails to do. It accumulates. The difference in all these cases isn't intelligence, it's interaction. One person is trying to get it right before they start. The other starts and gets it right along the way. And if you zoom out, the math makes this even clearer. An average return, compounded over time, beats a perfect return that you never actually capture. Waiting for the ideal moment sounds smart until you realize how many of those moments only exist in hindsight. Time in the market isn't just a phrase people repeat because it sounds good. It's a reflection of how compounding actually works. You don't need the best decision. You need enough decisions made consistently over time. And that's where reality quietly separates thinking from results. Over time, this pattern stops being just about money. It starts shaping how you see yourself. At first, it's subtle. You notice the gap between what you know and what you actually do. It doesn't seem like a big deal. You tell yourself you're just being careful, just waiting for the right moment. But that moment has a habit of never arriving on schedule. So the gap grows. You become someone who understands the game but doesn't quite play it. Someone who can explain what should happen but doesn't see it happening in your own results. And that creates a quiet kind of frustration. Not loud, not dramatic, just persistent. Because deep down, you can't blame ignorance. You know too much for that. That's where things start to shift internally. The longer you wait, the heavier each decision feels. Not because it's objectively bigger, but because now it carries the weight of all the time you didn't act. Every new choice feels like it has to make up for the past. So instead of becoming easier, action becomes more loaded, more important, more avoidable. And there's a cost most people don't notice right away. Missed compounding is one part of it, sure. But there's also behavioral compounding, the kind that builds skill, confidence, and instinct. Every action you don't take is a repetition you don't log. Every decision you delay is experience you don't gain. Over time, this creates a strange reversal. Your intelligence, which should guide action, starts protecting you from it. It gives you better and better reasons to stay still. More refined explanations for why now isn't ideal, why conditions aren't right, why waiting is actually the smarter move. And to be fair, those explanations are often correct. That's what makes this so effective. You're not lying to yourself. You're just using the truth in a way that keeps you stuck. So nothing breaks, nothing collapses. You just stay exactly where you are, with increasingly sophisticated reasons for why that makes sense. So the issue was never a lack of intelligence. That part is already there. The problem is how it's being used. Right now, it's acting like a shield, something that keeps decisions safe, controlled, and well justified. Which sounds great, until you realize it's also keeping you in the same place. The shift isn't dramatic. It's actually small and a bit uncomfortable. Instead of using intelligence to expand every possibility, you use it to simplify the decision. Instead of waiting for certainty, you accept a reasonable level of doubt and move anyway. You stop asking, is this the perfect move? And start asking, is this good enough to start? Because that's the real game. You don't need perfect timing. You need repeated exposure. You need to be in situations where things can work, adjust, and compound. Clarity doesn't come before action. It comes from it. And once that clicks, the contradiction from the beginning starts to dissolve. It's no longer confusing why someone with less analysis can get better results. They're not outperforming intelligence. They're applying something different. Consistency, positioning, movement. Smart people don't stay stuck because they don't know enough. They stay stuck when knowing replaces doing. If this shifted how you see your own decisions, then it already did its job. Share this with someone who thinks too much and moves too little. And if this kind of perspective helps you see things clearer, like the video and subscribe. It helps more than you think.